Hello craftspeople, and welcome to another guide on how to build levels in Miliastra Wonderland for the current Miliastra Creator event #SportsCraft. I built a few disciplines in Miliastra Classic mode for your good old Teyvat characters, and I just quickly wanted to show you a recap on how I tackled these things. And the first one of that series will be a racing game, a 100-meter sprint, to be fair. This is not a competitive game, it's a single-player game, so for each player you will have a separate timer. If you want to build a competitive racing game, the blueprints are pretty similar. Like, there are still some basic mechanics that you have to cover, which I will cover in this video today. I will quickly go over the player custom variable setup and templates. I will go over the objects, over the entities that you need to create to make a simple racing game work, and will show you a bit about how I personally designed my own racing stage. In the end, what we will end up with is a simple 100-meter sprint game that can be started. You can race from start to finish line, and then your score will be displayed at the end of it. So in the end, I will also talk about the leaderboard that I have here. I built two separate ones. You can also just download these in the Miliastra Resource Center. I published this banner here, like this speedometer, as well as this Billboard leaderboard in the Miliastra Resource Center. The IDs and links are in the description. But now let's talk about how to build this. So the idea for my current stage is Teyvat Sports Day, where you can compete in different disciplines like high jump, sprint and long jump to see which Teyvat characters are the best. So I also went for disappearance. Basically what I did here is use a wooden toy block, stretch it. So because it had kind of the color that I wanted, this is not ideal because the sound is not right. It sounds like wood. If any one of you know a better asset that I could use for the typical red rubber sand that they use on these tracks, please let me know. The only other prefab that I used here is a stone wall because it's basically white, and I used these as markings between the tracks. Everything else was really improvised. So I have some literal totems here and a crystal belt for the start line. But other than that, the decorations are very simple. These guys here are always super helpful if you want to have a speech bubble, right? To explain a bit what people need to do. But when you have like the appearance, this is also something you could do at the very last. But I just wanted to mention it as we are spending our time here. On this track, there are two important entities, which is this box here, the start line and the finish line. These two boxes are important to trigger our racing logic. So what is very important for the start line here is that you attach a node graph. This one has the node graph start line. You can have a look at this now. This start line basically just checks when a character is entering the collision trigger. So whenever any character that has a collision trigger source attached enters this, we will send a signal that the player started racing. Our server signal here, race start, is just a server signal that only has one entity, and it is the player that currently stepped into the collision trigger. And we're playing a start sound that we have configured here. The second object that we need is the finish line that also has a collision trigger and a similar behavior. The only real difference is that it will send a race end event with an associated player. And this leads us to the player setup, because our player will have to have some custom variables for the sprint. Don't be shocked about the 11 that I have in here. These are for all the disciplines that I'm going to make. For this simple racing, we actually only need lap time. If you want to make my really as a resource assets work, then you also need character and active for the character names for classic mode, and you need all of these to enable the speedometer. But for the logic of this simple race, we only need lap time, which is a floating point number. We will store the time that player used to perform the 100-meter sprint to put in here, and is running a boolean which just signals whether you have started a race and the timer should be running. First off, we need a global stopwatch timer race stopwatch and a collision trigger source. It is quite important that is a bit higher, because if you leave it at the default setting, then it will be not high enough to touch the ground, which will be hindering for some of the disciplines that I want to implement. The node graphs that need to be attached to your player, like if you use my asset, then you have to use the speed monitor. Otherwise, if you want to implement the racing logic, then can race should be more than enough. We have a look at the can race now, which is a bit bigger than the other node graphs because it does a lot of state handling, right? The main idea is that our self entity, here's the player, and this just reacts to race start and race end events. The first thing that you have to do is to check whether the player is actually self. So if we have started the event, that's the first if for both of these, and we are then checking whether the entity already has the running Boolean set. If it doesn't, then we set it to true at the start line, and we start a timer that is on the player himself. The race stopwatch, we will have a look in that in a second. If you want to reset this timer, then you have to stop and start one after another. And then I'm basically just switching some UI control statuses, like displaying the timer in my speedometer and reset the top speed for the current run, which is something that you don't need to do. That's just an extra data that I have in my asset. Accordingly, we kind of do the thing in reverse when the race is ended. So we're pausing the global timer so we can still read it, and we set our current lap time to whatever our race stopwatch timer captured. And then again, we set running to false because they left the racing track, and do some UI switches, and finally do our submitting of the score. So this could be just setting a variable in a stage somewhere. I personally have two things in here because I have two different scoreboards. I'm going to show you the method that I use with my Miliastra asset because I published a Miliastra Billboard asset for classic mode, and this is the one that you see right at the end of the track, right? Our third entity, the sprint scoreboard, that will in the end show the top 5 scores and is fed with this server event here, submit score, which takes a player name, a character name, and a score. And we can have a look into these, into the scoreboard, what record scores does. So whenever a submit score event happens here and it matches the type that we gave it, for in my case sprint, it will call a quite thick node, a composite node, update scores, which is not very important for you to have a look into. I also published a video on how to use this scoreboard, at least in classic mode it is already. So if you decide to use my Miliastra Resource Center asset, then this is what you would see. If you want to build that yourself, I will quickly also jump into update scores. It is basically, it looks quite complex, but everything that it really does is to sort that score that you submitted in the correct order in that high score list, in the top 5. You could also, instead of having a scoreboard, just collect these in the stage entity. And that's also the last entity that we have to adjust, because in our stage entity, you just put some score custom variables that are like lists with 3 items that are just default filled with 0 values, and you have a stage node graph that will monitor signals like submitted sprint score, the one that we used in our can race. We submit a sprint score here. This is then captured by the stage entity. Then we iterate through our score list, compare whether the new score will fit into the list. If it does, it will break the loop, and we will truncate the list afterwards so that there are never more than 3 entities or 3 scores in our score list. And about the UI side of things, if you want to display these scores, then you can just make a very simple scoreboard like this, where you just have a translucent text box in the background and some other text boxes, and for the top 3 you just input your sprint scores down here, or element 0, 1 and 2, and these are your 3 high scores. If you want to have a more elaborate view, that also features a racing timer and the current character name for classic, then like I said, you can feel free to download my Miliastra resource asset. It will also have extra instructions what you need to add to the player entity so that it works. And yeah, that's it for the sprint. See you in the next one, where I will discuss how I built high jump, which was the most challenging actually. Happy building.